Hey everyone, and welcome back to Scary Tales. If you're joining us for the first time, let me just say that if you're a fan of history's twisted truths and real people's accounts of dark and unexplained tales, then you're in the right place, because that's literally all that we do. And we upload twice a week. So, if you like what you hear in today's tale, make sure that you perform a holy ritual on the like button. Give it divine blessings, and then, just when you feel that you've gained its trust, tell it that you're actually the devil and that this is all a sick joke and it's actually trapped in hell where it will suffer eternal damnation and torture. Now, on to today's tale, a story so haunting with a twist at the end that none of you will ever expect or predict, and that much I guarantee. The Kennedy House for Boys in Perkinsville, New York, is more than just a building. It's a place where history and the paranormal seem to collide, creating this atmosphere of unease that's left a lasting impression on those who spent time within its walls. Now, it was established in the early 1950s, and it was designed as a reform school for troubled boys, providing a strict, structured environment where they could be rehabilitated. But as the years passed, the Kennedy House gained a reputation for being more than just a place of discipline. It became known as a place where strange and unsettling things happened, and where the line between the living and the dead seemed disturbingly thin. Now, the origins of the Kennedy House trace back to the early 1900s, but the exact details of its construction are somewhat elusive. It's known that the building was initially constructed as a residence or institutional facility, but whether it served as a convent or something else is unclear, although that is the local tale. And some locals believe that the building had always harbored a certain darkness, even before it became the Kennedy House. But these claims are difficult to substantiate. What is certain, however, is that by the early 1950s, the building had been converted into the Kennedy House for Boys, and the institution was part of a broader trend in mid-20th century America, where reform schools were established to help troubled youth through a combination of strict discipline and structured routines. Now, these schools were often run by former military personnel or individuals with backgrounds in law enforcement. And, of course, the Kennedy House was no exception. The staff enforced rules with an iron fist, believing that the only way to reform these boys was through tough love and hard discipline. Now, life at the Kennedy House was anything but easy. The boys were expected to adhere to a rigid schedule that left little room for anything other than work, study, and chores. And each day began early, with wake-up calls at the crack of dawn, followed by a grueling regimen of activities designed to keep the boys occupied and out of trouble. That was the whole point. The staff kept a close eye on the residents, ready to dole out punishment for even the smallest infractions. Discipline was harsh and often physical, a reflection of the belief that these boys needed to be broken down before they could be built back up. But while the Kennedy House was intended to be a place of reform, it quickly became clear that something was very wrong. The building itself seemed to harbor a sense of malevolence, a darkness that the boys could feel but couldn't quite explain. And it wasn't long before stories began to circulate among the residents. Stories of strange noises in the night, doors that would open and close on their own, and shadows that moved just out of sight. Now, were these just tricks being played by groups of mischievous youth? Maybe. But maybe not. See, there's more to this story. And one of the most notorious areas of the Kennedy House was the attic. The staff forbade the boys from entering the attic, claiming that it was due to old unstable structure, furniture, piles of forgotten junk, but the boys knew there was more to it than that, and whispers spread about the attic being haunted, with many claiming that it was the site of something truly horrific. The most persistent story involved a chalk outline on the floor, a macabre reminder of a tragedy that had supposedly taken place years before. And according to the legend, a young woman who'd ended her days here with us left her imprint on the floor, and it could never be fully erased. And some said she was a nun, though this detail seems to be part of the local folklore rather than a documented fact. The outline, they said, was still visible, a ghostly reminder of a life lost too soon. And despite the staff's warnings, a few brave or foolish boys couldn't resist the temptation to see the attic for themselves. They would wait until the staff were distracted, and then they would sneak up the narrow, creaking stairs to the attic door. And what they found there would vary depending on who told the story, but all agreed that the attic had a presence, a cold, unwelcoming atmosphere that made it clear that they were not alone and not welcome. The stories of the Kennedy house weren't confined to its walls. Residents of Perkinsville and the surrounding town of Wayland-Cohocton also reported occurrences that they believed were connected to the old reform school. Now, some claimed to hear disembodied voices late at night, echoing through the woods that surrounded the building. And others spoke of, strange occurrences, such as the porch screen door opening and closing on its own. One particularly eerie account comes from a local resident who lived near the Kennedy house in the 1970s. And this individual, who wished to remain anonymous, reported seeing a figure standing in one of the upper windows of the building late one night. Now, the figure appeared to be a young woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and the resident initially assumed that it was just one of the staff, but when they mentioned it to a neighbor, they were told that no women had been working at the Kennedy house for years. The figure, they believed, was the ghost of the young woman who had sadly passed in the attic. Now, these stories were enough to keep most locals away from the Kennedy house, even during the day. See, the building had gained a reputation as a place where the past refused to stay buried, where the dead walked among the living. And while many of the stories about the Kennedy house are based on local folklore and the accounts of those who lived there, there are also some documented incidents that contribute to its eerie reputation. And one such incident occurred in the early 1960s when a fire broke out in one of the dormitories. See, the fire was quickly extinguished, but the cause was never determined. Some of the boys claimed they'd seen a shadowy figure moving through the smoke. But these claims were dismissed by the staff as the product of overactive imaginations, and one of the boys was even suspected of starting it himself. Now, the Kennedy house might not have the widespread notoriety of other haunted locations, but it still certainly has its share of unsettling stories, some of which have been passed down through local lore, and some documented in historical records. And another such documented incident involves the unexplained disappearance of a staff member in the early 1970s. And according to local records, a janitor employed at the Kennedy house vanished without a trace after reportedly hearing strange noises in the building's basement. The man had been a longtime employee and was known for his no-nonsense attitude, as much of the staff was. So when he failed to show up for work the next day, his colleagues were concerned, and a search was conducted, but neither he nor any clues to his whereabouts were ever found. And to this day, his disappearance remains a cold case, with some locals speculating that he may have uncovered something in that basement that was never meant to be found. Another eerie fact tied to the Kennedy house is the presence of an unmarked burial ground located just beyond the property's borders. Now, some records indicate that during the building's early years as a reform school, there were some boys who had passed under mysterious circumstances and were buried somewhere on the grounds. These burials were reportedly kept quiet to avoid drawing attention to the school's harsh conditions, and over time, the exact location of these graves was lost. Some claim that the restless spirits of these forgotten children are responsible for the strange noises and sightings reported by residents and staff alike. And further adding to the building's sinister reputation are accounts of the Watcher in the Woods. The Watcher in the Woods is a figure that multiple former residents and locals claim to have seen lurking in the forest surrounding the Kennedy house, just in the shadows. And it was described as a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes, said to have watched the boys from a distance, never approaching, but always present. And while some dismiss these sightings as mere figments of overactive imaginations, the consistency of the descriptions across different accounts suggests that there may have been something or someone watching over the Kennedy house, though their intentions remain unclear. In addition to these accounts, there's also some reports of strange, persistent illnesses that affected several boys during the 60s. And, medical records from that time show an unusual spike in respiratory illnesses and unexplained fevers. And some of these residents are some of those to experience those effects. And while these illnesses were eventually dismissed as coincidental, some former residents have since speculated that they were caused by something within the house itself. It could possibly be linked to its unsanitary conditions or something more otherworldly. Now, these incidents, though varied in nature, all contribute to the Kennedy House's reputation as a place where the boundary between the living and the dead is dangerously thin. And whether one believes in the supernatural or not, the accumulation of these eerie and unsettling facts leaves little doubt that the Kennedy House is at the very least steeped in mystery and fear, with its dark history lingering just in the shadows. Another incident involves the tragic passing of a young boy who'd been a resident at the Kennedy House in the late 70s. And this boy, who sadly had a history of emotional and behavioral issues, was found deceased in his room one morning. The official cause was ruled as a taking of one's own life, but some of the other boys claimed that he had been acting strangely in the days leading up to this, as if he were being tormented by something unseen. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, and he spoke of seeing apparitions when no one else was around. And these incidents, while tragic, only served to reinforce this belief that the Kennedy House was a place where dark forces were at work. And the boys who lived there spoke in hushed tones about the things they'd seen and heard. And while the staff did their best to maintain order and dismiss the stories as mere superstition, some believed as well. In the late 1980s, there were reports from both staff and residents of strange noises emanating from the basement of the Kennedy House. Now, multiple accounts describe the sound of chains dragging across the concrete floor, accompanied by a faint, echoing cry that seemed to come from deep within the walls of the house. Despite several investigations from the staff, the noise was never found, adding just another layer of mystery to the building's dark history. But despite its reputation, the Kennedy House continued to operate well into the 21st century. And over the years, the institution underwent several changes, including shifts in leadership, updates to its disciplinary practices. However, the building's reputation as a haunted place persisted. And by the 2010s, the Kennedy House was struggling to stay afloat. Declining enrollment and the high cost of maintaining the aging building made it increasingly difficult to keep the institution open. The spooky stories surrounding the building didn't help, because boys would often misbehave just to be sent to another institution, thus losing funding. And in 2024, the decision was made to close the Kennedy House for good. The building was boarded up, its windows shuttered, and its doors locked. Then, demolition took place. But the building was never truly forgotten. The residents of the town still remember the tales. And here's the twist you've all been waiting for. See, I wasn't just an observer of the Kennedy House. I was one of the residents there when I was 15 years old. And the stories I've told you today aren't just tales passed down from others. They're also my stories, my experiences. And that chalk outline in the attic, I saw it myself. The strange occurrences, the unsettling moments, I lived them. And years after the Kennedy House was shuttered and left to decay, its dark legacy continued to linger in my mind. The building that had once housed so many memories was slowly turning into a crumbling ruin, its walls hiding the secrets of those who passed through its doors. The stories of strange occurrences and eerie encounters persisted, even after the building itself had faded from everyone else's memory. Now, the Kennedy House always held a sinister reputation, but for me, the memories were more personal. These tales of supernatural events, the unexplained noises, the sense of being watched, were things that I'd heard firsthand from people who'd lived through them. Yet, for all the fear these stories inspired, I never experienced anything overtly supernatural myself. But there was one incident that still makes me pause, even now. See, one night I walked into the kitchen to find all the cupboards wide open. It was a bizarre sight, one that I immediately dismissed as a prank by the other boys. But see, when I confronted them, they denied it, their faces pale with genuine fear. They seemed as spooked by the event as I was. if not more. And I shrugged it off at the time, but it left a lingering doubt, this small seed of unease that I just couldn't quite shake. And then there was the attic. The stories about the chalk outline were well known, a ghostly imprint left on the floor that many claimed to have seen. And I was curious. I ventured up there, and yeah, I saw it. It was a faint outline, almost erased by time, but it didn't scare me in the way that I expected. It left me with a strange sense, as though I'd glimpsed something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that should have been taken care of years ago. But there it was, clear as day, in the corner of the attic, behind piles of junk that the staff had seemingly taken care to hide from us, was a very, very, very faint outline. I don't know what to make of it. I personally couldn't find the actual documented historical record, but it was there. And those stories about the nun who had sadly ended her days was a story amongst us. One thing's for certain. The story of the Kennedy house will affect those who resided there, probably at least a little bit, for the rest of their lives. And that's it for today's tale. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to add that I do have a friend that was also a resident of the Kennedy house, who's now actually a paranormal investigator. He's got some stories that would send chills down your spine. So what do you think? Should I bring him on for an episode? Or maybe you guys have some thoughts on today's tale. Oh, what do you think? Never mind. You're not even animated yet. So let me go ahead and ask you guys. What do you think of today's tale? Also, tell me your craziest experience in the comments section below. Also, let me know what you think of Poe. He doesn't say a lot, but I'm slowly teaching him to talk. You tell me, should he just be a stoic figure in the shadows? Or would you guys like to hear what he has to say about things? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are all too real, just like mine.